Matthew 6:24. No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. Ye cannot serve God and Mammon. Now, I've always thought, especially growing up, church I grew up in, they were big on the red letters, and this is part of the red letters. And I always thought that was weird. It says you cannot serve God and Mammon. I always thought the two choices were God and Satan, God and the devil. Why does it say God and Mammon? And also, what is this Mammon? Well, the Mammon is, I looked it up in a Webster's 1828 dictionary, and it says that Mammon is the god of riches, which again seems odd why he says that. Well, you look over in Luke 16, that's the only other time that Mammon is mentioned, and it's in more detail there. So you get a better idea of what Mammon is. But people rarely read this, because when you read the Luke 16 passage, people think, well, what in the world does that mean? I mean, they're confused enough with Matthew 6 just being Mammon, and so if you just explain its riches, they, oh, okay, and then they move on. But if you read what Jesus says in Luke 16, giving more detail, it makes it even more confusing. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to confuse you even more. Luke 16, verse 9. Actually, it starts with a parable in Luke 16, verse 1. And it talks about this rich man who has a steward. And the steward ends up, in order to keep his job, he forgives a bunch of debt. I'll read this first because that'll probably make it easier to understand. Luke 16:1. And he said also unto his disciples, there was a certain rich man which had a steward, and the same was accused unto him that he had wasted his goods. And he called him and said unto him, how is it that I hear this of thee? Give an account of thy stewardship, for thou mayest be no longer steward. Then the steward said within himself, what shall I do? For my Lord taketh away from me the stewardship. I cannot dig, to beg I am ashamed. I am resolved what to do, that when I am put out of the stewardship, they may receive me into their houses. So he called every one of his Lord's debtors unto him, and said unto the first, how much owest thou unto my Lord? And he said, 100 measures of oil. And he said unto him, take thy bill, and sit down quickly, and write 50. Then said he to another, and how much owest thou? And he said, 100 measures of wheat. And he said unto him, take thy bill, and write 80. And the Lord commended the unjust steward, because he had done wisely. For the children of this world are in their generation wiser than the children of light. Interesting. He says there, basically what he's saying is that the children of this world, the reason they are wiser than in their generation than the children of light is because they know how the world operates. And here is a guy operating in the world system, understanding that his boss, remember it says there was a certain rich man. Well, how did he get rich? Usually, I mean, I know there are people who win the lottery, but for the most part, people who get rich pursue riches. And this steward knows that his boss, all he cares about is money. He basically serves the god of money, Mammon. And so the steward says, I am going to do something that will get my boss more money. It sounds bad because there are all these bills and he's forgiving some of the debt. But what he's really doing is he's being a collection agent. You see companies doing that. They have a collection agency, and they're willing to, for the people who owe them, they know they're not going to get that whole debt. So they're willing to forgive part of it in order to get as much as they can. And the steward basically, and the rich man basically says, this guy got me a lot of money. He didn't get everything, but he got what he could. And the reason it says that the children of this world are in their generation wiser than the children of light is because those who are saved usually tend to be the real judgmental type people, who are the real sticklers. We call them legalists, and they say you got to do everything right or you're going to hell type thing, and they don't recognize the grace of God. They don't preach grace. Churchianity doesn't preach grace. Even when they say they preach grace, oh, if I'm a murderer or I'm an adulterer, I lose my salvation. Well, how is that grace? Well, yeah, it's just grace as long as you have true faith. See, they're not wise. They don't preach the true grace message. No Christian denomination does that. But yet in the world system, the world of riches, they do have grace to some extent because it facilitates their end. And so the next verse, Luke 16:8 says, "The Lord commended the unjust steward because he had done wisely, for the children of this world are in their generation wiser than the children of light. And I say unto you, make to yourselves friends of the mammon of unrighteousness, that when ye fail, they may receive you into everlasting habitations. He that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much, and he that is unjust in the least is unjust also in much. If therefore ye have not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, who will commit to your trust the true riches? And if ye have not been faithful in that which is another man's, who shall give you that which is your own? No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. Ye cannot serve God and mammon." So that's the full explanation of Matthew 6:24, because he ends with the same thing that he says there. Ye cannot serve God and mammon. But people wonder, well, what in the world is this talking about? If I can't serve God and mammon, why does God tell me to make friends of the mammon of unrighteousness, that when ye fail they may receive you into everlasting habitations? How does that work? You said don't serve God and mammon, and yet you're saying the mammon are the ones who receive you into everlasting habitations. That doesn't make any sense. Basically what Jesus is saying is, like it says over in 1 Timothy 6, the love of money is the root of all evil. Here, let me read that to you because I don't want to misquote it. 1 Timothy 6:10. "For the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows." You read the verse before that, verse 9. "But they that will be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and into many foolish and hurtful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition." Basically what God says is there are two systems. There is God's system and the devil's system. God's system is have faith in whatever gospel God has told you, depending on what dispensation you're in. And when you have faith in that, God gives you eternal life. The devil's system revolves around the God of riches, the God of money. That's why Jesus says you cannot serve God and mammon. If you serve mammon or the God of riches, then you are serving the devil, and you will fall, and you will not believe the gospel. You will follow Satan's system. So Satan, the devil, has a riches money system. The devil told Jesus, just bow down to me. All these kingdoms of the world I will give to you if you will worship me. He says, I will give you riches. And Jesus says, he's not doing it. He says, thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God. He says, I serve God. I don't serve mammon. And I'm not going to tempt God by trying to get what God has promised me, the kingdoms of this world, by bowing down to the devil, by following the mammon system. And so that's what Jesus warns against. But notice he says in Luke 16:9, make to yourselves friends of the mammon of unrighteousness. The reason he says that is basically humans are hard-headed. We've got a lot of pride. And we need to see how bad that evil system of the world is and be rejected by that system in order to believe. Now, Israel, I understand, is a little different from us today. In the dispensation of grace, when you believe in Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection as atonement for your sins, you are received into everlasting habitations at that time. You are seated together with Christ in heavenly places at that time. For Israel, they are not received into everlasting habitations until the second coming of Christ. That's when they receive forgiveness of sins. So they're not received into everlasting habitations until then. What they have to do is follow the gospel of the kingdom and endure until the end of the tribulation period in order to be saved. God gives another parable, and offhand I don't have it in mind where it is, but it's in the book of Luke, and he gives the parable about the sower and sowing the seed. And it talks about some people, if I talk long enough I may find it, but it talks about some people, here it is, Luke 8, Luke 8:14, that which fell among thorns are they which when they have heard go forth and are choked with cares and riches and pleasures of this life, and bring no fruit to perfection. They hear the gospel, they believe it, but then riches come along and they follow that, and they're not saved. Earlier he says in Luke 8, he says in verse 7, some fell among thorns, and the thorns sprang up with it and choked it. And that's related to the cares of this world, the riches. The point is, Israel during that hand phase of the kingdom has to make a choice. They have to serve God or Mammon. They believe what God has told them, or they seek the riches of the world. And what Jesus is saying in Luke 16 is, if you believe the gospel of the kingdom, he says, make to yourselves friends of the mammon of unrighteousness. So go ahead and participate in the system of this world, the riches of this world. Then what's going to happen, it says that when ye fail, that's the key part there, when ye fail. Because you are serving God, because you believe God, but yet you end up participating in the mammon system, the riches of the world system. Because you hold true to your faith in God, you are serving God. And you cannot serve God and mammon. Well, the people in the mammon system are serving mammon. So the result is, if you serve God and they serve mammon, the result is you are going to fail. You are going to be kicked out of that system. And when you are kicked out of that system, then, that's why it says, when ye fail, they may receive you into everlasting habitations. You will recognize how bad the world's riches, the God of the riches of this world system really is when you get into it. And so by getting into it, he's telling the disciples, then you will recognize that believing the gospel of the kingdom is what you need to do. And the reason he tells them that is because they are going to have to be faced with the decision to take the mark of the beast and receive economic prosperity, receive food and clothing, and receive all those things of the world through taking the mark of the beast. Or if they don't take the mark, then they won't have any of that stuff. Well, the world, for the most part, is going to take that mark of the beast. And God says, if you do that, you've sold your soul to the devil. You have your place in the lake of fire. Revelation 14:9-11 tells you that. So Jesus says, you need to get to know what this system is about, this mammon system. So go ahead and make friends of the mammon of unrighteousness. And because you trust God and not mammon, and you can't serve two masters, then you are going to fail. And when ye fail, then when they try to get you to take the mark, you will see how evil that system is, and you will not follow it. And so by that way, they receive you into everlasting habitations. In other words, you see how evil and corrupt the devil's riches system is. And so then, remember 1 Timothy 6:10, the love of money is the root of all evil. And it says, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. If you go after the love of money, then the result is you will err from the faith. And for Israel, it means lose their salvation. What about us today? You won't lose your salvation today. But when you realize how evil that system is, then you won't love money anymore. In other words, it looks good, it looks glamorous, all you hear about the riches of that system and how they get that. And so people desire that. That's why they play the lotto. That's why they dream about having millions of dollars. But if you learn the kinds of sacrifices that you need to go through in order to receive that money, then you will say, wow, I don't want to have anything to do with that. They're going to reject you, you're going to fail, and now you're not able to get the millions of dollars because you serve God and not mammon. And so then you'll say, I want to serve God. Yeah, I wanted the riches of this world, that would be great. But because I am a new creature in Christ, my spirit says I don't want to do all those evil things. And when you learn how bad the evil things are when you get into that system, then you don't follow it. So that's why Jesus says that. And the reason I mention that is because we recently watched a couple videos, and I'm going to put the links in the description. Ronald Bernard is a guy who was part of that system, and he saw things that very few people see, and he saw really how evil that mammon system is. It is controlled by, he says, approximately 8,500 people, and all of those people, it's in the entire world, he says. This guy is from the Netherlands. He speaks Dutch. In the videos, you've got English subtitles there because he doesn't, it's an interview there in the Netherlands. And he exposes that system in these two videos. It's over an hour long, but it tells you a lot of that stuff because he knows what goes on in the inner circle of those 8,500 people. And he says every single one of those people that control the finances of the entire world are involved in Luciferian worship or devil worship. He says the horrible, I'll let you watch the videos to hear about the horrible things that he saw. And when it got so bad like that, he decided his conscience finally got to him and he got out of that. Now, I don't think he's a Christian now, but the point is, he exposes how bad this system really is. And that system, you see it today, is primarily controlled by the Freemasons. And I recognize most Masons do not do all those bad things because we're only talking about the upper echelon, the 8,500 that are involved in the Luciferian worship. The Masons have doctrine to sort of dumb it down to keep people from the lower Masons understanding what really goes on at the higher levels. And so most Masons have no idea what's going on there. So I'm not accusing the majority of Masons of being Lucifer worshipers. But they've got a doctrine that keeps them away from learning the true gospel, from accepting Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection as atonement for their sins. And that doctrine of the Masons shields those top people who control the world's finances so that they can go after these pure evil religious things that they do. And so I wanted to let everybody know that these videos, but also let them know that this is scriptural. This is not anything new. As the book of Ecclesiastes says, there is nothing new under the sun. Jesus Christ said you cannot serve God and mammon. He didn't say you cannot serve God and the devil, because most people are not that bad. They would notice it because God has written upon their hearts that there is a God and he is worthy of worship. And they are not going to stoop to what those 8,500 Luciferian worship people do right away, because their conscience will get to them and they won't follow that. And so what the devil has done is he's created this God of riches or God of mammon, and he gets people to participate in this system, and they have lower level knowledge of the things that are going on, And as a result, they love money, and they err from the faith and pierce themselves through with many sorrows, as 1 Timothy 6:10 says. Jesus warns them about that. He says, you come into that with faith. You believe the gospel. You have the gift of eternal life, and then you go into that system, and then you will see how bad it is, and you will fail because you won't serve mammon, you will serve God. And then as a result, you won't desire or go after those things of the mammon system because you will see what it costs. So I encourage you to watch the 2 videos that I have in the description, and know that this is scriptural. God talks about you cannot serve God and the God of riches. And this guy goes into what the manifestation of the God of riches is today in our society. Thanks for watching.